Jessica Valenti has a book called He's a Stud, She's a Slut, and 49 Other Double Standards Every Woman Should Know. And she has 50 in here, and I'm going to read some of them because they seem obvious, but we sort of take it for granted. We accept a lot of double standards without thinking, okay? So here's something to think about. He's an activist, she's a pain in the ass. Men who are political, whether they be activists, organizers, or politicians, are passionate, driven, intellectual. Women activists, however, are big fat pains in the ass. They're neurotic and annoying. They're not taken seriously. Unfortunately, this is one double standard I know all too much about. While men who work for change are revered and admired, women who do the same are often scoffed at, dismissed, or outright hated. It's been happening for a long time. Take women who fought for the right to vote. If you take a look at any of the political cartoons from back in the day, you'll find a lot of caricatures of suffragists as old, ugly ladies who are beating men up. Seriously. Those feminist stereotypes have been around a while. Another asks, when women vote, who will wear the pants? Unfortunately, the negative reaction to women's activism wasn't just op-eds and political cartoons. In a 1913 protest organized by women suffragists, women were literally attacked, so much for treating us like ladies and all. People spat at the marching women and mobbed and beat them. The police, who were supposed to protect the marchers, did nothing. Over 200 protesters were injured. Women like Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, who were imprisoned for their protests several years later, were beaten in prison along with other suffragists. Their poor treatment came to light later, but it's not often talked about. The movie Iron-Jawed Angels is all about it. You should check it out. Men who fought for such basic rights and put up with abuse are quoted throughout history books. We get a chapter if we're lucky. Later in feminist history, women activists were not so much outwardly abused as they were ignored. Because, women couldn't possibly have anything interesting or important to say. Susan Brownmiller, in the book In Our Time, tells of a pivotal moment in the beginning of the second wave women's movement that occurred at the 1968 National Convention for New Politics. Joe Freeman and Shulamith Firestone had drafted a resolution on women, which was to be met with an all too familiar poo-pooing. Back at the main session, Joe ran down the aisles handing out copies of the resolution, while Shirley charged to the podium. "Cool down, little girl," the session chairman told her. "We have more important things to talk about than women's problems." Brownmiller also discusses the reaction of her male counterparts after women marched in an anti-war demonstration with a float dedicated to women's rights. Quote, "The peace activists were appalled. Stopping the Vietnam War was still the chief priority, wasn't it? This action they held was petty, disloyal, divisive." Nice, huh? I hate to say it, but women's voices in politics are treated much the same way today. When we bring up reproductive justice or racism, for example, we're focusing on single-issue politics. A recent kerfluffle in the repro rights sphere happened when several male activists and writers suggested we just forget about Roe v. Wade, the case that made abortion legal, because it was causing too much division. They argued that if we just left the abortion decision to the states, it would be all good. And what about the women in states where abortion was illegal? Too bad for them. So basically, the daddy Dems wanted the little ladies to pipe down and let the men worry about what was best for them. I find it interesting that when it comes to making concessions for the good of the party, women's rights always seem to be the first to go. This isn't to say that all men in politics ignore women's voices. I'd like to think that we have more allies today than we ever have. Blogger Scott Lemieux from Lawyers, Guns, and Money weighed in on this particular controversy with considerable aplomb. Indeed, what is finally most intolerable about the new anti-Roe consensus is just this willingness to throw the rights of others under the bus while patting oneself on the back for making noble compromises. It's certainly easy for men living in blue state urban centers who know that no woman in their family or social circle will ever be denied a safe abortion to casually dismiss the importance of the rights of poor women in the 24 states at high risk of banning or severely restricting access to abortion in a post-Roe world. Other men like Scott speak out on behalf of women every day. But it kind of sucks that it takes a man speaking about these issues in order for people to take it seriously. So what to do? Make our voices heard as often and as loudly as possible. If you're an activist, don't let men dominate the conversation. Speak up.